Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. Thank you for tuning in today. Please make sure you check out some of our other conversations and subscribe to the channel. Today, we are exploring the mystical side of life with Courtney Marcassani. Courtney is a perception coach, and we are talking about empaths today. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for having me.
I think it's really important that there's an honoring of energy and how easy it can be for some people to really tune in and pick up energy.
Well, that's the crux of it right there. I mean, I think a lot of times when an empath is not aware, that honoring part is not happening. And so you're seeing through their experience that they're picking up on things, but the crux of it really is the honoring part. So I love that you're opening with honoring because it's a way to set the pace, in terms of the empathic discussion, because the empath, personality, but also the way it works is so fascinating. It's such a fascinating topic. And anybody who's an empath or doesn't know that they're empath who's listening will find out through our conversation by listening to the content of it. Oh, I might be one of these people. And so I'm always like super jazzed up when people find content about empathy or that they might be an empathic person, because it really does open the door to this whole other awareness about what empathy is, deep empathic awareness.
We all have capacity to have empathy. Can you maybe help us differentiate what a sacred empath is and what just the regular empathy that everyone has access to?
It's a really great starting point because empathy is a human trait, but it's also found in over 100 other species of animals. And so it is a animal trait. And how it differs in a scale is clinically, empathy is known as an emotional resonance. To have emotional resonance with another person. So to feel in resonance with them, feel their feelings and understand what those feelings mean. But there is, in that clinical way of understanding, a self to other processing. So the individual who has the empathy and is feeling someone else's feelings knows it's like a first person perspective. For example, you and I are here. So I would feel your feelings, but I would know it's myself to another person's processing. I'm processing your feelings. When you get into the deep empathic ability, somebody who is more farther out on the spectrum, and I put that spectrum of sensitivity, is to people who have a little bit of sensitivity and then greater magnitudes of sensitivity, if you're looking at it as a scale. Those individuals who are farther out on the spectrum, that self to other distinction seems to kind of erode. It just kind of dissolves, and they don't necessarily know that they're processing someone else's feelings because their empathy is such a greater capacity that they don't necessarily recognize it. So that is how I look at it, that it's kind of a scale or a grading, and that some people are highly aware that they're picking up on other people's feelings. But then when you start to get into super sensitivity and hypersensitivity, that empath might not be aware that they're processing someone else's feelings in their own mind and body.
Now, does it always specifically relate to feelings, or can it just be energy? And the reason I ask this, Courtney, is because when I'm working with people, and let's say they have a lot of sadness in their system, I have an eye that will tear, and I can tell by the energy that's in that tear that it's sadness. Likewise, if they have a lot of joy, that eye will have a tear filled with joy, and I can tell the difference. But I'm not taking on their actual feelings, but I can distinguish through the energy what it is that's going on in their system.
Well, that is really developed. I mean, I first want to say kudos to you for developing that and recognizing that. Most people don't have an internal guidance system like that where they can kind of tease out, oh, this is grief. This is the tear of grief. Or, oh, this is a tear of bliss that I'm feeling, right? And that ecstasy, like, so yes, it's absolutely energy. And empaths being sensitive to energy and all different kinds of energy and even spiritual energy. So I start off talking very clinically usually and putting things in terms that, are like counseling oriented. But once you start to get into the spiritual side or the mystical side, it's all energy. It's a web of energy. And empaths seem to be the barometers for the emotional currents in the room that they enter into. They can tell the moods, the way the moods shift. They can tell motivations of others, passions of others. And so they can really see behind the veil with the energy. They're totally using energy, and energy is the way that they're perceiving all of this. Energy sometimes is a little too far out for people, but I love that it's what you're talking about is the, direct discussion of energy, because that's really what it boils down to. It's all energy, and empaths are sensitive to all of it. So mental, physical, spiritual.
Well, we are exploring the mystical side of life, Courtney.
Yes, I love the mystical side of life. I always like to have the opportunity. That's kind of how things came about for me, was that I was in a traditional clinical, like hospital setting in mental health and the outpatient mental health division. And so my own experiences were very mystical, and I was looking for solutions, but it was underneath that, very clinical umbrella. So I was always exploring the mystical side of life with this stuff until it started to become, now, that was 20 years ago. Now it seems to be a little bit more acceptable.
Absolutely.
Empaths especially. Like when I was working as a clinical counselor, they were not having the empathy discussion at that time, but now empathy is in healthcare. It's in clinical settings, so it's come a long way. I'm excited to see where it's going to go in the next 20 years, the discussions around empathy and how far advanced it will get in terms of our learnings.
I really think that being an empath is a gift when you know how to use it as a tool for understanding and discernment. It can be really amazing, like you say, drawing that curtain back from the veil and having a peek at what's in the other side. How would someone know if they're an empath or a highly sensitive person?
A couple different ways. Sensitivity is, it's generally known that there's 1 in 5 people in the population, so 20% globally, cross-culturally. They've done those studies for 20 years and found that statistic is very real. So, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people are sensitive. What does that mean? That means that these individuals have a depth processing function where they, in any given environment, they're perceiving more sensory information through sight, sound, taste, touch. They just stick with the 5 classical. So they're experiencing more sensory information through their awareness. Now, when it gets into empathy, I look at empathy as a gift of sensitivity. So in that 1 in 4, in that 1 in 5 people, you'll find patterns that emerge. And empathy is one of them, where these individuals seem to have a greater sensitivity for that emotional piece. Because sensitive people are perceiving so much through their perception, they also respond faster emotionally. That's one of the factors of sensitivity that it often gets overlooked, but those individuals respond faster and they have a more complex emotional reaction. So not only do they feel feelings from what they see, hear, and feel, they also respond in complex ways to what they see, hear, and feel. So you could put a sensitive in a room with a bunch of other individuals and they're going to be responding faster to what they see, hear, and feel, but then they also have feelings about it. And then there's an intensity that comes with those feelings. So it's actually kind of a complex personality structure that is taking that information in and then responding to it in specific ways. And where empathy comes in is that emotional reactivity gets more and more and more profound, and to the point where they can feel other people's feelings as if they are their own, like we talked about, but they don't necessarily know it because they've always had that type of empathy. So they don't know how to tease out other people's feelings. So that's kind of how I look at it, a little bit as a classification. You can have sensitivity, but not necessarily have that deep empathy.
I think it's important that we realize that the empath may be feeling someone else's emotions, but then they have their own emotions triggered with that as well.
Yeah, I talk about that specifically in my book because I go into really a deep dive about emotional reactivity and how the subtle nuances of that work for the empath. And it can be very, like we've talked about, very blissful. Like when empaths expose themselves to different types of environments in nature or healing work, or even just their own energy when they're doing their work, it can be an ecstatic state of bliss. But a lot of times what you hear about through the empathic experience is that they feel that they're being overloaded with emotions from other individuals that are really projecting their energy or projecting their emotions outward and not conscious of it, and the empath picks it up. But what happens is kind of a chain reaction where the empath picks it up and feels it, but then it kicks off this whole emotional connection within themselves, and they might not be conscious as to why. Now that really comes down to the empath's deep work and working through, why am I triggered essentially by this emotion, and to try to tease out, well, what part of this is it? Now, a lot of times, deep lingering feelings that get projected are from, like early childhood. And that's kind of where it'll stem from. Like, why is this triggering me? And it's an emotion. And so it's not necessarily something that you can think through, but a lot of times that's what empaths have to learn, is why those things happen. Because if it's a cascade of emotions that are being triggered that are negative, then they can just get stuck in that. And it's hard. It feels like a sand trap that's hard to get out of emotionally. And so you can see how that could become problematic for the empath.
I'm sure there are a number of places where there are challenges along the path. I've been pretty fortunate in my own journey, but I managed to create a system that works really well for me. What would you say to an empath who's really struggling?
I think that the best advice that I have found through all my years as an empath, through my own work and as a teacher, is to step away, step back. That's the first thing. That's if you're in like an overwhelming situation where you're feeling flooded by emotions, but you don't know where they're coming from or why, and that triggering is happening where your own emotions deeply inside are being raised up. And so it's kind of a two-pronged thing that's happening and you're feeling overwhelmed by it. It's always good to step back and step away from that situation and take a walk. Like typically it's best to be outdoors, right? To be outdoors in fresh air. And then you'll see that first part of it, or the triggering aspect, whatever's coming in, evaporate. So that's the first relief, that an empath goes, oh my gosh, this is not me. This is coming from something else. And they can get that feeling sense that they are in control of the situation. And as they remove themselves even further, it will dissipate, typically completely. Now, the emotional reactivity that's happening inside is an internal job. So that becomes about grounding oneself. And those experiences that can be pretty dramatic actually tend to lead empaths into that kind of work, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, or practices, energetic practices that are grounding, that allow the feet to be in contact with the earth, with gentle movement, for the cultivation of the self to happen, and for the empath to observe that these experiences are coming from within, and that the grounding helps to be able to ride through those waves. So you don't have to seize up so much as an empath and just remove yourself. You'd be able to start to realize through those practices of grounding that it's you. So those are the things you have to learn as an empath to be able to tell yourself from someone else. I call it me and not me, because that's the distinction, that self to other distinction, that helps the empath recognize, oh, these are my feelings versus someone else's. And it's critical. It's crucial to be able to do grounding best to be doing the grounding every day, but sometimes if you forget about it, you can always do your grounding. So just even sitting in a chair and feeling your feet making contact with the earth and doing a visual exercise where you're feeling the energy going down into the ground and coming back up at the seat of your chair or your sacrum and your feet is a great place to start. It's a first level, easy trick to start grounding routinely in your daily life. And then things become a lot less chaotic energetically.
And what are some of the gifts, Courtney, of being an empath?
Well, I go into all the different types of empathy, and that's the really fascinating, complex part about empathy. There's different types. So I go into the compassion aspect of empathy, because you might have empathy, but you don't have that urge to feel compassionate, right? You're just feeling the feelings. But then the compassionate empath has that deep desire to help. So there's the compassionate empath that really wants to help in a situation and feel that they're in that situation to help as an empath. Then there's the advocacy or counselor empath. These are also two nice gifts from empathy that comes out where there's like that not only the wanting to have that compassionate, but it's a more detached type of compassion where it lends itself into like advocacy, legal, social justice, and things like that as an empath, where they can just be so dominant and positive, as a force for change as an empath. Then I go into the spiritual empath in my book I'm referencing, where I talk about the blissful aspects of empathy, where it's not necessarily wearing rose-colored glasses, but these empaths seem to have a transcendent function, that where they can transcend through physical reality, through their embodiment, and be able to perceive the world spiritually. So they become spiritual advisors, they become spiritual leaders, pastors, ministers, or medicine people. And then there's the empath healer. The empath healer is also a specific type, where these individuals seem to be able to couple their empathy with a healing function, where they work with others as a healer. And so those are the profound gifts that come through empathy, or these different types of empathic abilities that really lend themselves well to working with other people.
Tell us the name of your book.
It's 4 Gifts of the Highly Sensitive. And I break down the patterns that I found looking through sensitivity for so many years. I didn't start with sensitivity. That wasn't like my research path. I started with intuition, because it was my own intuition that I recognized through personal experiences that led me on this path. So the book 4 Gifts of the Highly Sensitive is 20 years of research recognizing these gifted patterns within sensitivity. And intuition is the one. We talked about empathy, visionary abilities, and expression and creativity. So those 4 gifts I go into great detail in the book, and then I talk about healing modalities that you can use to maximize your gifts.
Such beautiful gifts that I encourage everyone that has that empathic tendency to really start to learn how to use it as a tool, because it will shift your life incredibly.
Well, I love your perspective that it's a positive. A lot of times when people are seeking out help, right, when they do feel like they're in that overwhelmed or that state of chronic fatigue or chronic exhaustion, and they haven't made the connection that it's to their empathy, but they're starting on the trail, it can be perceived as like a ball and chain kind of that you're walking around with the empathy. But I like that your conversation is really on the positive aspect, because it is such a positive ability. And once you feel like you've healed with it or you've gotten grounded with it, it is a remarkable gift that you can use all the time while working with others, or with your family or your children or your friends. I mean, you can kind of become the empath in your community to help. And so I'm not saying everybody who's an empath needs to take those roles, but when you do, and you're balanced and you're centered with it, you really become powerful in terms of your positive effect on your community.
It's all about connection, right?
It is. And when you connect with an empath, if you're not empathic and you're not in these kind of discussions, it doesn't matter. You're still going to feel something when you connect deeply with an empath. And then that's typically what most people say, like, I feel different, or I feel positive from being around her or him, or or I sensed something was happening. And so that is the emotional resonance that the deep empaths are able to, pass along, is that positivity, that bliss.
Do you think that an empath's energy system is in some way different than other people? And by energy system, I mean aura.
I do think it's different. I mean, I think that's a much broader conversation, is the way that they perceive reality through their own awareness. But I do think their physical and auric system are different. Yes.
Do you think that their aura actually takes on some of these emotions to help other people process that energy, or is it just an information tool for them?
I think that it is, I think empathy in the auric system is an information tool for all of us, right? I think that it is part of our makeup. And when you start to look into the systems of medicine, the ancient systems of medicine, we all have these sheaths, or we all have the auric field. But what happens when you start to dig down into these different types of giftedness is you start to see the changes that take place, whether it's the body physiology, actual like neural anatomy, or you look at the auric sheath, you start to see that there are subtle differences. And so I think that absolutely empaths are able to, in that sheath, feel more of the energetic influence coming in from others. The difference that you see is that they somehow hold on to that in the aura, like a stickiness almost. And why is that? I don't know. It's hard for me to weigh in on why, like, the divine would make that part of it, but it does certainly seem to be that through that etheric or energetic chakra, that seems to be a little bit more developed for the empath.
Which is probably why being in nature is such a gift for the empath.
It's so healing. It's so healing. Like when the what hits the fan, get into nature, or perceive nature, or imagine nature if you can't get access to it. Do visual guided imagery, or something where you're doing meditations where you're connecting with nature, because that does seem to be a recentering. Our greatest healing source as empaths is to connect with nature, and your brain will respond to it. I mean, I find a magnitude when I'm in nature that's much greater in terms of my own healing, but I also know that if we respond to it visually doing meditations, we also get the same healing benefit and the same response, because our mind is a very powerful asset. So connecting with nature it's the primary source. So I always recommend empaths. Most times they're already gravitating towards nature as their healing source for movement meditations, or walks, or swimming, or running, or hiking. It does seem to be very healing, and it just kind of resets the central nervous system.
I would say a good salt bath helps too.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Epsom salt. If you haven't been introduced to Epsom salts, that's a good one for the empath, because it also kind of resets and clears and then calms, very calming. Like empaths who are very touchy and very, deep emotional processors need to have those systems in place so that they know that they feel safe. So any kind of cleansing rituals like that will always help. I mean, I've heard empaths talk about, washing their system, washing their energetic system. So I always tell another good tip is, if you feel triggered in some way emotionally, is to shake your hands out, shake your feet out, shake your body out, because that's also what animals do. When they encounter things in nature, that's how they reset. And that can be a simple thing that might look weird on the outside, but it feels totally regenerating, and that you can just shake off whatever it was and move on. And that's what empaths, need to understand, is that it's not going to linger forever when you do your work.
Courtney, it has been wonderful having you here today.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to connect with you, please share your contact information.
Inspired Potentials is my website. If you want to find out what your specific gift is, or sometimes people have multiple gifts, you might have two overlapping. I have a test, a sensitivity test, and a gift test on my website that's free. You can go there and take the test, and I'll send you a personalized email with your gifts and then a little description about each. And then I offer an invitation. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. So that's the best place to find me. Or you can find my book, 4 Gifts of the Highly Sensitive. And that covers everything we've talked about and goes much further into depth and really illuminates the gifts.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you again for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely. I love the empathic conversation.
And thank you for listening to this week's edition of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You will find all of our conversations on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Come and visit me at thoughtchange.com. Pick up your copy of Learning to Listen. And while you're there, check out my group, Alchemy from the Inside Out. Maybe it's time to bring a little magic into your life. That's it for this week. Bye for now.